All right, let's dive into a really high-stakes geopolitical drama, one that played out in one of the most critical waterways on the entire planet, the Strait of Hormuz. This is a story all about a tense standoff, a war of words, and a call to arms that, honestly, could have tipped the world over the edge. It all kicks off with this bombshell of a statement from former President Donald Trump. And look, his words didn't just make for good headlines. They really set the stage for a massive international incident. This was a direct challenge to Iran and a call to action for the rest of the world. So to really get what's going on here, we have to look closer at the American position, because this wasn't just some tough talk. It was a very public, very specific demand for other countries to form a coalition and get involved. And here's where the logic gets really interesting. The whole reason for asking for help wasn't, hey, we need backup to fight Iran. No, the argument was that the US had already done all the heavy lifting. They claimed to have basically wiped out Iran's military. So all these other nations had to do was show up with their ships and help keep things peaceful. And, this wasn't some vague plea to the international community. The Trump administration was super specific. They publicly called out these nations by name, expecting them to send warships. These are countries with a huge stake in the oil that flows to that strait, and now they were being put on the spot for the whole world to see. And make no mistake, there was a very real threat backing up this demand. This quote makes it crystal clear. While the US was waiting for this coalition to get its act together, it was more than ready to go it alone, and to do it aggressively. The language is just so blunt, so direct. There's really no room for interpretation here. So, how did Iran react to all of this? Well, as you can probably imagine, they weren't just going to sit back and take it. Their response was just as forceful, and it was all designed to project strength and to challenge that American narrative head-on. So, Iran's first play was to push back against the idea that it was isolated. Their foreign minister immediately started talking about their strategic partners, specifically China and Russia, and he made sure to mention military cooperation. The message was loud and clear. We are not alone in this. But this is where things start to get a little messy. Iran's own messaging seemed pretty contradictory. On one hand, you had reports that the supreme leader wanted the strait closed to everybody. But then you had the foreign minister saying, no, it's open, just not for the US and its allies. This kind of inconsistency made it really hard to know what Iran's real game plan was. Now, President Trump used a really powerful and very specific word to describe Iran's situation: decapitated. When you use a term like that, you're implying that the leadership is gone, the command structure is a total mess. It basically signals a complete and total victory. And you better believe Iran had something to say about that decapitated claim. Their foreign minister flat out denied it. He came right out and said the new supreme leader was in place and that, quote, the system is working. This was a huge part of their counter-narrative, projecting stability while the US was claiming they were in a state of collapse. Okay, so you've got the US making these big demands and Iran pushing right back. But what about the rest of the world? I mean, how did the countries that were actually called on to send their navies into this powder keg, how did they respond? Well, the expectation from the American side was that this whole thing would be pretty straightforward. The plan was for the US to lead and for its allies to just fall right in line. There was this real sense of optimism that everything would go, quickly, smoothly, and well. Yeah, but the reality? It was a million miles away from that optimism. Just look at these responses. They were cautious, to say the least. Phrases like high legal threshold or careful review, that's basically diplomatic code for, we're not so sure about this. Nobody was rushing to sign up. France even said they'd want a coalition after things stabilized, which was the whole point of the coalition in the first place. This was definitely not the decisive alliance the US had in mind. So what do you get when you mix these bold proclamations, defiant comebacks, and really hesitant allies? You get a classic geopolitical standoff, where the tough talk just smacks right into reality. And that's exactly what happened. The result was this incredibly tense stalemate. The US asserting its military power, Iran projecting its resilience and refusing to back down, and all the allies that were needed for a coalition just standing on the sidelines, not wanting to get dragged into the middle of it. The strait was left as a very dangerous flashpoint. And of course, it wasn't just governments reacting. The public had some really strong opinions too. Take this online comment, for example. You can just feel the sense of embarrassment, questioning the leadership, and the whole idea of asking for help in a conflict you initiated. And that feeling was everywhere. This comment really gets at a perceived hypocrisy. You spend years alienating your allies, and then, suddenly, when there's a crisis, you expect them to jump in and help? It really highlights the deep skepticism a lot of people felt, and hey, maybe gives us a clue as to why those allies were so hesitant to get involved. So this whole situation leaves us with one huge critical question. When you have all sides digging in their heels, with this escalating war of words, a defiant opponent, and partners who want nothing to do with it, what happens next? Especially when it's all centered on a waterway the entire world depends on. In the standoff, that question was hanging heavy in the air.